No? Can you hear me? Good. How's everybody doing today? So I am Mark Pundsack, VP of Product Strategy at GitLab. And earlier today, you heard some great news about GitLab, and we've heard lots of great stories from our amazing customers. So right now, I'd like to take a little bit of a step back and like maybe kind of a walk down memory lane, if you will. Talk about where we came from, and then a little bit about where we are today and where we're going in the future. So when GitLab first started out, it was really just Git source control with a little bit of issue tracking thrown in. But developers needed more than just source code management, and so pretty soon we added CI. And it turns out developers love source code management and CI together. And that's great, because we love developers. Now just quick show of hands, how many of you identify as developers? All right, most of you, that's pretty good. Now, so I can get a sense for how long you've been on this journey with us, put your hand up again if you've been using GitLab for more than a year. All right, now keep your hands up, 2 years. 3 years? 4 years? Oh, there's a couple out there, great, 5 years. It's like, good strong hand back there, awesome, thank you so much. That's really great. So if there's one thing you remember from this presentation, it's that GitLab is for developers. But developers don't just stop when their code is built. You need to get your code into production. And then, of course, once it's in production, you need to monitor it to make sure that it keeps running the way you want it to. And so GitLab evolved, and we started adding ops features. And pretty soon, we were covering the entire DevOps lifecycle. So if there's one thing you remember from this talk, it's that GitLab is for DevOps. But the thing about most DevOps tool chains is that they're just not solving enough. I mean, back in 2017, $3.8 billion was spent on DevOps software. But more than half the time spent doing DevOps is wasted on logistics and repeatable tasks. And while it's better than it was, almost 90% of the companies that adopted DevOps were dissatisfied with the results. And the main reason for this is right here. How many tools did you have to string together to form your DevOps toolchain? When you think about everything needed from planning a project, creating the code, testing it, packaging it up, deploying it, configuring the infrastructure, monitoring it to production, securing it, and many folks I talk to say they have even more logos in their stack. So chaining these tools together comes at a real cost of integration complexity. And this is the tool chain crisis. And you need people dedicated to build, test, maintain these integrations. And they're brittle, and they can often fail. Can't we just have one platform that does all of this? So at GitLab, we set out to create a complete DevOps lifecycle, DevOps platform delivered as a single application. Break the tool chain crisis and provide a single tool that everyone can use and collaborate with together. So if you only remember one thing from this presentation, it's the GitLab is a complete DevOps platform delivered as a single application. So that's pretty cool, right? It may even sound too good to be true. So maybe it's better to see this in action. So let's get Dan Gordon on stage here to give us a little live demo of the GitLab DevOps platform.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, I'm Dan Gordon. I'm a technical marketer here at GitLab, and I am excited to show you guys how you can use GitLab end-to-end to go from your code all the way into production and beyond that. So Eddie was up here earlier. He gave a great demo about how you can take GitLab and customize it to do your bidding, right? And he did pull in parts of some GitLab components that we make available, which was great. But what I'm going to do is step back a little bit and show you how coming in from the start with code and not having to configure anything, you can actually get GitLab to do all the work for you. So we're starting here in a standard project. The project is just a really, really simple application, nothing, no screaming chickens, sorry. But what it is just a static web page, but the point isn't the project or what it ends up producing. The point is there's no definition of a pipeline here. No CIML file. There's no definition anywhere in GitLab attached specifically to this project. And we're going to see what happens. So we'll start by popping over to the boards, to the issue boards, because GitLab does have issue boards, as you've heard here a couple times already. And these boards are part of how we organize the work that we do. This is a simple one. We're just getting started in this project, let's say. And so I've got only a few things, but there's work that I need to do, first of which is get some GitLab style on the home page. So before I go into that, I'm going to quickly swap over to a board that we actually do use so you can see kind of the contrast. This is my team's work board. We use it to track, whoops. And we use it to go all over the place. Here we go. We use it to track all the work that we have going on and what stage it's in, as well as what work is stacking up and that we need to make sure that we get prioritized and work on. So back to our simpler issue board. As a developer, I'm going to come in. I may choose which one I want to work on. I may take a quick look at each of them. And at some point, I'm going to pick one and move it to doing so that that's adjusted, that information is now radiated throughout anyone that looks at this issue so they know that someone's picking it up. And go ahead and assign it to myself and then start taking a look at it. Now, an issue is a work item. It's a way that we capture the work that needs to be done or the problem to be solved. It's not about the solution. In this issue, I have something simple that we can have images, we can have conversations. It's a way for everyone to collaborate and agree what are we trying to solve for. In this case, it's pretty straightforward. We kind of set up our server and forgot to get rid of the default homepage. So we need to do a little bit of work there. I can have conversations with whoever is around the world working or looking at this issue. Like Joe admitted it's his fault. So let's go ahead and get working. It seems like a pretty simple thing to fix. Now, in another tool, or tool chain, in order to do the next step, I would have to go to an SEM system and set up my branch. I would have to go to, if I'm using a different tracking system, to make sure that that information is there, and go to a couple different systems if I wanted to link everything together and have, maybe make sure my infrastructure is ready for me to start working with it. In GitLab, I press that button, create a merge request. Now, this merge request in GitLab is, as I think many of you are already aware, is going to track the work that we're doing. So this is watching the solution. This is now going to become the command central for all the work that we're doing to solve that problem. So all the work we're doing for the solution of the problem. The first thing GitLab does is it creates a branch that I can work in, sets up the merge request, associates it to the issue. Later, it's going to close it when I close the merge request. So we're keeping things neat and tidy and updated. And at this point, I'm ready to start working. So it's Git. I can go into any IDE that I prefer. I can also pop into our built-in web IDE. There's some loud advantages to this in that I have a consistent environment. When I want to make some changes wherever I go, I can get access to this and know how my environment is set up. That's also true across all of my coworkers if we use the same environment. I'm going to go pop down to this Java file, and I'm going to make a few simple changes. We'll change the background. And if you'll excuse me, I'm just going to cut and paste here so I don't mess that up. And we should probably not have that up, excuse me. And we'll get just a quick logo line here. And so we'll change this from the default, and we'll have it say something a little more appropriate. Now, I'm going to get rid of this to do in comments because I've already made that change. And then I'm going to drop in the logo, which we're just going out and getting that from a different source. OK, so I've made a few simple changes. I'm going to go ahead and say commit. Now, GitLab instantly, the web IDE, instantly gives me a diff so that I can see and do a sanity check, make sure that I didn't leave a star in front of something that shouldn't be, which is a typo I made another time. And it looks good. So I'm going to go select the files that I want. In this case, there's one. But I can pick, just like with Git, which files I want to commit of the changes I've made. I'm going to go ahead and leave us a quick note. Change the message, the background color, and added a logo. Now, it's already preset because it sees that I'm working. I have a branch already, so it's set up already to allow me to just say, go ahead and commit that to the branch. I can choose to create a new branch if I want. We're going to go ahead and commit it back. And already it's kicked off a pipeline. And I don't know if you can see that way down in the corner there in the status bar. So we're going to open it up again in the web IDE. There's another pipeline view that shows us it's kicked off a pipeline. This is also kind of a vertical view if you're used to looking at graphs, pipelines running horizontally. We'll do that. We'll pop over to the pipeline graph model. And what we can see is that a whole bunch of stuff is already getting done. Now we're going to go into the details here. First, I'll cover build. And as you heard from an earlier presentation, the system is looking at my code. I didn't have to tell it what I had. We're using Heroku's build scripts to look at this and determine what I have, how I should build it, or how it should build it, eventually how it should test it, and then it's going to create it, put it into a Docker image, and put it into the built-in registry. Now, if I want to offer my own Docker image, which actually, if those of you were looking closely, there was actually one in here, then that little process can happen a little bit faster. And I can also provide my own details, my own build scripts to basically look and figure out what my language is, if there's not one available. So it's going to, after the build, hop in and start doing parallel tests. So these 6 tests are running in parallel, and the system GitLab will scale out to support it properly. At this point, I'm going to do the cooking show bit. I'm going to pull a cake out of the oven because I think you guys probably don't want to sit and watch this build, right? So I have here an identical pipeline. This is actually a clone of the project from earlier. Made the same changes, and I went ahead and went through the steps of this demo so that it's already built out. Ta-da! A cake, it's baked. So I'm going to talk about here, what are we doing in the test area, okay? First thing is we're doing code quality scanning. Then we're doing container scanning, which means we're spending all this time making sure that the application is secure. Actually, hopefully we are. We had to get a lot of people still need to get to that. But we also want to make sure that the environment that the code is going to run in is secure as well. So in this case, the container scanning is going to do that. We're going to do dependency scanning, where we're looking through all of the code that your code depends on and all the code downstream, and making sure we're aware of all the vulnerabilities that are known within that code and bring those forward. We're also going to do license compliance scanning. So we're going to look at all those dependencies again, and we're going to look at the licenses that they use. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, because there's some licenses out there that your organization may not be comfortable with, that they may have a policy against, such as viral open source licenses that may require you to give away your code if that's not what you want to do. So this will look at all of those potential licenses and flag anything that your policy identifies as unwanted. Then, it's also in parallel going to be doing the static application security testing. Now, this is going to be looking at the code and looking for known patterns of vulnerabilities, so things like buffer overflows, to make sure that those are identified as well. We're also going to take any of the developer tests. This is, again, where the Heroku build packs are going to come in, and we're going to use that to say, okay, what's the language? How would we normally test for that? Where would those tests be normally? And so it'll find all that out and run your developer's unit tests or other tests. So that's a lot of stuff. And I wanted to stop for a second and point out, hey, this is about as far left as we can do this. So we oftentimes hear this term shift left, and I know that's a term that people kind of roll their eyes and get sick of because everybody says it, not everybody does it. This is out of the box, okay? And this is about as far left as we can get. It's right after the developers made the change and we've done the build. So we're checking as early as possible for all of these different challenges that that can show up in our code. And when I say out of the box, I don't mean it's a pipeline that's defined that doesn't have the integrations. Out of the box here, this is a best practice pipeline. It's a capability on top of GitLab. That's a best practice pipeline from all of the people that we work with, all the organizations, all of the inputs that actually runs the steps that it's saying should be run, right? These capabilities are built into the product. Now, after all of that's done, it's going to do, so it's funny, when I was listening to the speaker, I think it was Eddie, he said, no magic here. And while I agree, absolutely, there's no magic here, posit that, what is it, Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So I'll just say that. At this point in the review app, GitLab is going to do a little bit of magic with our Kubernetes. We have a deep integration with it. It's going to take what we've built so far. It's going to take Kubernetes. It's going to spin up the environment. It's going to connect it to the network, whether it's public or private. That's based on your configuration. And it's going to connect that information all the way back to your merge request, your issue, and all throughout the system. So you can look at any point along the path, and you can get a running example of your code change that can be tested, that can be validated, that can be kicked, the tires can be kicked on. So on top of the review app, having that there also allows us to do things like dynamic application security testing. So this class of testing is going to be looking at a running app, things that you can't find in the code. Things like configuration errors that might leave a directory open that has important files that shouldn't be accessed, or maybe even the file permissions themselves. So it's going to try and find its way through in a live app, and we're able to do that because we have a running app. And again, as I pointed out, on every change, on every branch, not just at the end when we're done, or when we think we're done. Likewise, with performance monitoring, browser performance monitoring, we're going to use site speed I/O, and we're going to come back against the review app and look at what the performance is. We baseline it and see if the change you make is actually causing the user experience to be better or worse. So that's a lot of data. There's a lot of things running here, and you get a whole bunch of output. Now, if you were integrating a bunch of external tools, you're probably going to have to go through the logs and say, OK, I have a review app, and I'm pretty sure somewhere in here, oh, there it is, right? That's the URL I want to go actually look at my running app. But in GitLab, everything comes back to that central control, the merge request, right? And this merge request is connected to the issue, so we know where the spawning of the idea was. But you also see now the merge request has got a lot more information, not just the branch that I'm working in, but also the pipeline status. And here's that review app that was set up. So I can quickly go and say, oh, there's my running app, whether it's a static page or an entire application with the Screaming Chicken. It's all available right here for any of your stakeholders to look at. I also get all the information back in the merge request, the code quality scan information, the security vulnerability scan, so it found one new vulnerability. I can look directly in my MR, and I can get information about that vulnerability. So here I am looking at this vulnerability that was just found. I have the ability to either create an issue, so we can make sure that we handle it, in which case all this information will be pulled into that issue. I can dismiss it, in which case it will continue to show up. My manager will see it in their report. My security admins will see it in their report until we make sure we do something about it. I also have my license scan output. And here, there were no new licenses that got introduced in the last code change. But I also have access to the full report on this particular set of code. And we can see that there's a lot of licenses we're using, and it tells us which code is using which licenses. You can see that there's check marks and X's. Those are based on our policy, what licenses are whitelisted versus blacklisted, and some we don't know yet, and we need to set those. So if you have permissions to set policies, you're able to go and define that ahead of time for the project, what is acceptable and what's not. So we're looking at the merge request. We have all this information. We also have approvers at the top here, which I'm not going to go into because I'm probably already pushing the time limit. But that is a whole nother dive that you can take as far as setting up approval rules and whatnot about who can merge and when it can be merged. Eventually, I'll merge it. And as I said, this is the cake in the oven. I already kicked it off, so it shows that I merged it. When I do merge it, it's going to kick off what we call effectively the release pipeline or the CD pipeline. Open that in another tab here. Now that pipeline looks pretty similar because we're going to do all these tests again. We don't know what's changed from the beginning to the time that we actually said, hey, let's push this to production. But it's now going to go to staging because I have it set that way, and it's going to stop and wait for a manual rollout. So at this point, I can actually go ahead and kick off that rollout. In this case, I'll do 100%. While that's doing that, now here's the race. Let me see if I can get there before this happens. Let's go ahead and look at the operations. On the operations side, there's a lot of things we're not going to cover in this demo, like feature flags and server lists and error tracking. We're going to look here's the list of environments that we have set up. And I'll close that so it gets not too confusing here. And we have our production environment and our staging. If we look at our production environment, that's still running the old stuff. It won't be for long. If we look at our staging environment, we can see it's got the new stuff. And the review environment, of course, has the changes that we just made. And so that's great. I can go into any particular environment and see the details about what was deployed to that environment at any given time, including the change details, and I can roll back to any of those as necessary. But instead, what I'll do is, oops, so you can also see that there's this information that we have additional because we're deep integrated with Kubernetes. These are the pods, so the instances of your application that are running. I have access to the pod information, including the pod logs. Maybe. There we go. Okay, sometimes. I know the demo gods were going to get me at some point. Here we go. And I also can do quick troubleshooting by hopping into the terminal and look around, or not. I'm going to stop clicking on that stuff. Oh, wait, no, I can't. I'm a masochist. I'm going to try again. Here we go. So I can get onto the terminal and I can do some troubleshooting. Of course, you want to bring that back into your configuration so that it lives on, whatever changes you make. And while I'm at it, here I am. So I have access to all this information. I can see what's been deployed where. But that's not the whole story, right? This is DevOps, and DevOps is not just about developing great software. It's not just about developing great software and then putting it on a system somewhere, right? DevOps is about developing great software, deploying it out into the world, and then watching it and understanding how it behaves in the world, and then getting that feedback loop back into the system that's designing it. And that's why we got those two loops, so that we can keep improving the software. That means you need to monitor it. And so out of the box, we have the monitoring. We'll do that on staging. Now, the monitoring is built in. It's based on Prometheus. It runs automatically configured on every application I deploy to every environment. I didn't do any augmentation of my code or anything to look at this information, to get this information. And out of the box, I've got access to the error rate, the latency, the throughput of my application. See, it's been hit a few times. Some more stuff that we don't have the data for right now, but also the information, the monitoring information about the underlying infrastructure. Right, those Kubernetes clusters, in this case, the pod average for memory usage and for CPU usage, and the whole cluster average as well. Now that's great, and you're probably seeing all these little rockets and wondering what those are, right? So this tells me at what point I had deployments. So I might see something like this and say, oh my gosh, there was a spike after this deployment. Maybe I want to go take a look and understand, like, could that be responsible? Yeah, I can do that. So here I jumped right into the change that ties all the way back to the system, in the system automatically, to the issue that I opened, the merge request that I started to actually affect this change, has all the information, who did it, when it was done, including the change itself. So how's that for pretty good troubleshooting capabilities and access to the whole system? So I'll just pull up the monitoring page again to leave it there. And I think that's pretty cool. That's pretty amazing. And that is a complete DevOps platform delivered as a single application. And that's GitLab. Thank you.
Mark? Thanks so much, Dan. That was fantastic. All right, so as you can see from Dan's demo, DevOps is not just about dev and ops. Security is actually baked in as it plays a critical role in business these days and can no longer just be an afterthought. Being able to run security tests on your code from the first commit is pretty amazing and completely shortens that cycle. So of course, we cover development, security, and operations capabilities, but what about the people? We're going further and covering developers, security professionals, and operations professionals as first-class citizens, letting each person have a unique experience tailored to their needs. Quick show of hands. How many of you identify as operations? Not that many, not that. Okay, how many of you security? Anybody in security? Handful, right? So a lot less than developers. Maybe next year we'll see that change a little bit, because we really want to make this the main interface, make GitLab your main interface for all of these people. You know, have them show up at work, start your day, and load up GitLab, and that's already happening. So, so we've got dev, sec, and ops. In GitLab 11.4, we shipped the ops dashboard, and this provides an operations-specific view across multiple projects so that ops personnel get the information that's most important for them. And now it's available actually as a default homepage, so you can log in and immediately see exactly what you need. And then from the dashboard, you can quickly launch into other parts of GitLab and collaborate with everyone else across the org. So imagine an ops person finds an issue in production and then drills down to the application and sees that a recent deploy caused the problem. Now, simultaneously, a dev gets alerted that their recent deploy caused a problem in production, and they go to their merge request and actually see the performance change right there in the merge request. So now when dev and ops talk, they're looking at the same data, but from their own point of view. Now for the same reason, we also released a security dashboard. And security teams need to manage and mitigate business risk. The security dashboard surfaces and highlights the overall status of application security. And it too can now be your default homepage or your default page when you're looking at a group. So when dev, sec, and ops talk, they're all looking at the same data, but from their own point of view. So if you only remember one thing from this presentation, it's that GitLab is for dev, sec, and ops. So where are we going to go from here? Well, as Sid said earlier, we have a lot of work to do. This is our category maturity page, and it's actually a public page you can get to right from our homepage. For each of these 10 stages, there's a bunch of categories, and then for each category, there's an icon showing the, currently how mature it is. So some of these are really mature and even lovable, but not everything is. And really, some of these we haven't even started yet. There's nothing at all. But we will start, and we're going to get all of these to be lovable. As Sid said, I think the goal for the next 3 years is to get half of these be lovable within 3 years. So still very ambitious. Now, if you're like most people, you might be a bit skeptical, and you might not think we can really pull this off. But we've got a pretty good track record going. We've got this growth that's just kind of really amazing. Now, GitLab, the company, is growing, but it's not just us developing all this great stuff. You see, GitLab is open core, and we've got people contributing to this, and I'm really excited to see that the rate of contribution is even growing. And some organizations are even paying people full-time to contribute back to GitLab. I really love that trend. Now, you are all co-creating GitLab with us. All you heroes out there, together, we're working to make DevOps a reality for teams in open source projects and in enterprises. Now, getting back to this chart, there's way too much future work to talk about here. So I just want to pick one item, that one of my favorite upcoming features, and I'm going to go into details a bit more about. And that's auto-remediation of security vulnerabilities. Now, auto-remediation is a really great example because, well, it's a really cool feature, but it also really highlights dev and sec and ops working together. So what is auto-remediation? Well, projects usually depend on other projects or modules, And when one of those dependencies has a vulnerability, there's usually a patch to fix it. And so one of the common security tasks is watching for these updates. And then when that patch is released and you need to update your software and test it again, make sure everything still works. That's a pain. Unfortunately, many teams don't bother keeping things up to date, or maybe they update things once a year or something like that, which means that there's a lot of times there's vulnerabilities that are out in the open for way longer than they need to be. Some of the teams do keep up to date, but it's a lot of work. A lot of times you get the junior developer or the intern to do it or something like that, but why does anybody have to do all this repetitive work? Can't we just automate all that away? So instead of making anybody do this repetitive work, we want to automate it completely. Here's a mock-up of something that may or may not actually ship looking like this, but we're working on it. And so in this case, this is a bot that detects that a dependency has a new version. And now, it would already be pretty nice if that bot just alerted somebody and said, hey, this new version, go ahead and update it. But is that really the best we can do? So instead of alerting someone, how about automatically creating a merge request that goes and bumps that version number and then runs the test suite to make sure everything still works? Now, there are some tools out there that do this, but many stop here. So if we know the CI pipeline passes, well, how about automatically merging the changes? I mean, you trust your CI pipeline, right? So if all goes well, your security and development teams don't get alerts telling them what they have to do. They just get an email telling them that all their projects have automatically been fixed. But what if everything doesn't go well? Of course, if the CI tests outright fail, then sure, you should get an email about that. But we all know that automatic tests aren't perfect, and sometimes tests pass, but things still show up in production anyway. But like a good DevOps organization, you've got monitoring and alerting set up on production. And even better, you're doing progressive delivery, where your pipeline is rolling out to a small portion of your fleet, like a canary, so that it limits the scope of any problems that get detected. So great, now, if we detect a problem in production before it rolls out completely, again, we could alert you to that and then be like, okay, now you've got to go fix this. But can't we go further still? Here, the bot detects that the problem happened in production during the whole process and automatically reverts, automatically rolls back production and reverts the merge request. So it just handles all this kind of stuff automatically for you because you want to leave everything into a good state. Now this, we can finally alert the teams about. So instead of having to manually test 20 projects, you can focus on the few that can't be automated. So that ties together dev and sec and ops, a single platform that lets everyone collaborate and work together better, breaking down silos. But do we stop at dev, sec, and ops? A ton of people are involved in the development and delivery of software. This is the ultimate GitLab vision, where everyone involved with software development and delivery uses a single application, so they're all on the same page with the rest of their team. We've recently launched the first features for designers, and we'll soon have more features for product managers. And we'll be expanding on the business side with executive visibility and reporting. Heck, maybe even legal gets involved in license review. So while we're still calling it DevOps, we're really expanding the definition of DevOps and delivering it all in a single application. So if you only remember one thing from this presentation, that GitLab is for everyone. And with that, I thank you, and let's go get some lunch.